Knowledge is power, and power makes you dangerous. The influence you have over other people will protect you, but it might kill you. You will build a fortress around yourself. You'll carry a weapon with you at all times, but if the knowledge you have is too dangerous, then nothing will be enough. On September 1st, 1992, Piotr Jaroszewicz was an unfortunate victim of that simple truth. He was a paranoid man who surrounded himself with tall walls, but he was killed inside those walls with his wife. Who killed them? We don't know to this day, but we know what killed them. Power. It was the power they had. Piotr Jaroszewicz was one of the most influential Polish political figures in the 20th century. He started his career as a teacher, went on to become an officer, then he collaborated with Soviet authorities until eventually being granted the post of lieutenant general in 1945. But his rise to power wouldn't stop there. Over the next decades, Jaroszewicz's influence only spread. He has held many powerful positions, rising through the ranks of Communist Poland, which culminated in 1970 when he became the Prime Minister of Poland. For a decade, Piotr Jaroszewicz was arguably the most powerful man in the country. 10 years later, as he was blamed for many economic failures in Poland, Piotr Jaroszewicz resigned his post and was expelled from the Communist Party, at which point he completely withdrew from politics. He went to live in a quiet Polish region of Anin. A disgruntled veteran who has lost the trust of his people, Piotr lost his influence, but retained his knowledge. His resignation set the stage for the events that would follow. Piotr was a closed-off man, leading a secretive and secluded lifestyle. Neighbors rarely saw him, and those who did couldn't tell much. He and his wife, Alicja Jaroszewicz, rarely made public appearances. They lived behind a 10-foot-tall barbed fence and kept a trained Schnauzer dog for protection. Piotr always kept a gun on hand. Some neighbors even reported Piotr to walk his dog while carrying a gun. Now, if this sounds normal for an American viewer today, then think again. Possessing a gun at that time was seen as strange, almost paranoid, as the Polish gun laws were extremely strict. In fact, most Polish people haven't even seen a gun in person back then, and Piotr would take his gun with him when he went to greet the mailman at the front door. Though it's no wonder Piotr was so concerned for his safety. He wasn't faring well on the court of public opinion at the time, and most importantly, he was described as a vivid archivist. He would always be in his study, writing and documenting things. He had a diary with thousands of pages, Nazi archives, economic scandals, contacts with Moscow, you name it. He would protect those documents, and they would protect him in case somebody powerful wanted to threaten him. Unfortunately for Piotr, his enemies didn't stop at threatening. When Jan Jaroszewicz, concerned over his parents not responding to his calls, showed up to their house, he was greeted with a shocking sight. His father, Piotr Jaroszewicz, tied to an armchair, bruised, tortured, dead. He was strangled with a rope of some kind, looped around his neck and tied to an axe. The axe would then twist, slowly tightening the rope, cutting off air until the victim suffocated to death. Interestingly, some of Piotr's inflicted wounds were bandaged during the torture, so did the attackers need him alive? They surely didn't care if he was a little bloody before he died. His wife was found in the bathroom. Her arms and legs were tied together. She had been shot through the back of her head with a hunting rifle from their own house. Her blood was found in another room, mixed with somebody else's, suggesting there was a struggle of some kind. The case is still surrounded in mystery, and many peculiar details stand out. Piotr was bound to an armchair, his wife was restrained in the bathroom, and he was being tortured. But his right hand wasn't tied up. Did they want him to write something? There were no signs of forced entry, and it was unclear how the culprits scaled the tall, barbed fence. Their dog, which had been trained to attack unwanted strangers, was found weak and slightly paralyzed at the crime scene later. It appears the dog had been sedated with something, which would suggest great planning and preparation on the killer's part. The public was in shock. The crime came out of nowhere. It was brutal and mysterious. It became known across the country in a matter of days. Reporters were frantically searching for clues and making theories. The government chimed in, and a whole new commission of the Ministry of Internal Affairs was made, specifically to investigate this murder case. The pressure was quickly piling up on the investigators. People needed results. They wanted to know who did it and why. Unfortunately, this meant that the police prioritized results over truth, and it wouldn't take long until the first suspects were detained. In April 1994, 4 people were arrested on suspicion of burglary and murder in what I call the desperate arrest. The case was flimsy at best. A knife was found in possession of one of the suspects. Piotr's older son, Andrzej, claimed his father had the same knife given to him as a gift, though he would become less certain of that during the actual trial. He would go on to say that the knife may have just been identical, and lots of knives like this were found to exist. One of the suspect's partners testified to the prosecution that she had heard the suspected men planning something. She would hear them say things like targeting a rich old man or planning a job in Annin. During the trial, however, she would later refuse to testify altogether. Another woman, who had been a victim of a similar kind of robbery, claimed she knew at least 2 men among the suspects, but once again, during the actual trial, she testified that she only knew their descriptions from the media. It appeared that all major pieces of evidence were retracted or made useless when the trial was taking place. Was there some pressure by the prosecution, or were some people threatened not to speak? In the end, none of the 4 suspects admitted their guilt, and the simple lack of hard evidence was enough for the court to rule the 4 men as innocent. In fact, even the prosecutor himself requested that the men be acquitted. That's how weak the case was. The whole thing was frankly a farce, and the 4 men were acquitted in 1998. It would take another 20 years before another lead could be produced. This time, the prosecution's job would be much easier. While on trial for an entirely unrelated case to the Jaroszewicz murders, a man named Dariusz decided to confess to being complicit in the murder of the Jaroszewicz couple, along with his 2 colleagues. The 3 men had admitted to participating in a so-called karate gang back in the day. The karate gang was known for meticulously planned robberies across Poland in the 90s. They would target rich people, avoid stealing identifiable valuables, and usually leave without victims. Dariusz, Robert, and Martin were all part of that gang. According to Dariusz's testimony, the break-in was entirely financially motivated. The perpetrators first took care of the dog by feeding it food with a sleeping agent, then they climbed over the 10-foot-tall fence using ladders they had found around the premises. They entered through the bathroom window, which was slightly open at the time. Once they were in the house, they hit Piotr on the head, incapacitated and restrained him. Then they dressed his wound and even allowed him to change out of his bloody clothes. His wife was then moved to the bathroom and completely tied up. As the perpetrators took what they needed and prepared to leave the premises, they heard a lot of noise as Piotr, a war veteran and a former officer, was allegedly freeing himself from his restraints. That's when the perpetrators decided to return to the house. As 2 men held him down by his arms, the third strangled him to death, after which one of the men took the former Prime Minister's hunting rifle from his study and shot his wife in the back of the head, causing immediate death. Among Dariusz, Martin, and Robert, all 3 men were charged based on confessions. Curiously, one of them, Robert, later fully recanted and denied ever being there. The crime was consistent with the other burglaries of the karate gang, even if the murders were unplanned. With such a descriptive testimony and a modus operandi that fits their previous crimes, the mystery of the Jaroszewicz murders was finally solved. It was, for all intents and purposes, the confession that cracked the case. After an incredibly long legal process that took years, on November 22, 2024, the trial concluded and the court found the three men innocent. You see, what I've told you so far was pure testimony produced by one of the three men suspected in the case. And as it later turned out, the case relied almost entirely on this exact testimony to support it. The judge ruled that the evidence presented by the prosecution was too inconsistent and not credible enough to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Although, it is not difficult to imagine the breaking was done for material gain, as the prosecution so desperately tried to prove during the trial. Wealth is your most basic motivation for a home invasion, especially somewhere like post-communist Poland. The culprits acted like seasoned robbers, wearing coveralls, ski masks and gloves, and most importantly, they did steal something. Namely, 5,000 German marks, 5 gold coins, 2 guns and a woman's watch were missing from the house. However, if the goal was financial gain, the killers were spectacularly incompetent. They left behind all the jewelry in the safe, they left valuable paintings and antique objects, they risked multiple murders just to steal some coins and a watch. My 6-year-old cousin could do a better job of robbing that place. The killers spent hours torturing Jaroszewicz, they treated his wounds and changed his clothes. If they didn't want to kill him, that's fair enough, but they returned to finish the job. Why keep a victim alive unless you desperately need something from him? Why leave his right hand untied? The more you look at the case, the more ridiculous the financial motive seems. The only room in the house that showed signs of a thorough search, and the only room that was left actually messy, was Piotr's office. And what was missing? Missing from his safe were 1,800 pages of Jaroszewicz's personal notes and diary. The real loot wasn't financial, it was information. It was whatever knowledge Piotr Jaroszewicz has possessed. As one of the suspects, Dariusz, was questioned throughout the months, his own testimony began changing drastically. He had changed or recanted his explanations and later went on to admit that he exaggerated parts of his testimony to get a more lenient sentence on another kidnapping case, one he was actually guilty of. It is likely that Dariusz drew from the prosecution files to make his testimony more believable, but it ultimately fell short. As you can probably tell, I don't believe these guys were guilty either, though the prosecution has stated that it will appeal the court's decision and we're still waiting for the results. The fact is, we still don't know who the killers were. A proper motive could be very helpful in identifying the culprits, and there is no shortage of theories about why the Jaroszewicz couple was killed. If it wasn't money, then what was it? Each of the mainline theories is connected in one way or another with the knowledge that Jaroszewicz may have possessed, whether through documents he kept on his person or otherwise. Over his long career as a politician, Jaroszewicz has amassed a hefty pile of papers. He was known to be constantly collecting notes, documents, and he kept them in his Black Satchel. This satchel was his protection against whoever was willing to besmirch, threaten, or discredit him. The theory states that whoever broke into Jaroszewicz's house aimed to take ownership of the documents inside the satchel, whether to protect themselves or obtain leverage. Most of his personal notes and diary were missing from the house, as stated by his own son. As previously mentioned, there is another crucial detail. Piotr's right hand was free. If this was just a robbery, why not immobilize Piotr completely? But they left his hand free because they may have needed the former prime minister to use it. This theory would support that he was needed to write or sign something. The theory itself is solid but not all that specific, as we have limited knowledge about the kinds of notes Jaroszewicz has kept. Could he have known something specific, something that would drive powerful people to want his death? Jaroszewicz, a former general who lived in seclusion, broke his silence in 1991, just years before his death, and gave an interview where he shared an interesting view, the view for which he may have been targeted by the KGB. He would describe to the interviewer how certain influential Soviet figures were in fact not real. According to his theory, politicians would be replaced by doppelgangers, so-called Matryoshkas, who were trained by the Soviet Union to spread propaganda and attain control across the communist Poland. Simply put, Jaroszewicz believed that some Soviet agents were still running the country in disguise. Honestly, the more I look at some of our political leaders today, the more I start to believe in this theory myself. But why would Jaroszewicz be killed over something like this? The answer is simple. Because he wasn't the first. General Karol Świerczewski, a Red Army general, was ambushed in his car and murdered in 1947. Karol also reportedly believed in the doppelganger theory. And here's the important part. He was the first husband of Alicja Jaroszewicz, the murder of whom we're investigating right now. Those who supported the theory saw a clear pattern. Anyone who identified Moscow as Matryoshkas had to be silenced. It is alleged by some that Jaroszewicz had been planning to expose certain key political players for being Matryoshkas, placed by the Soviets, threatening the control they have. In a post-Soviet time filled with paranoia and uncertainty, it is no surprise that such a ridiculous-sounding theory would pick up a lot of traction. The Nazi archives theory could be viewed as an extension of the Black Satchel theory that I covered just a couple minutes ago. By the end of World War II, the Polish army took over the archives of the Reich Security Main Office, where the Nazis were unable to remove the documents from the archives before the Soviets arrived. At this point, Colonel Piotr Jaroszewicz was present during the archives raid. Many documents were taken, and Jaroszewicz didn't take these secrets alone. He was with two trusted companions, Tadeusz Stec and Jerzy Fonkowicz. And the reason I find this theory the most convincing is also pretty simple. All three men were later murdered in their homes. Tadeusz, a mountain guide, was killed by an axe in his home just a few months after Jaroszewicz, and Fonkowicz, an intelligence agent, was also tortured before he died in the same period. None of the culprits are known to this day behind any of the murders. And at this point it becomes hard to dismiss these murders as coincidence. The Nazi files allegedly detailed the collaboration between France and Nazi Germany, and the information in those documents could have smeared the reputation of many international politicians at the time. The theory states that Jaroszewicz has kept some of those documents in his house, which were taken in the assault along with Jaroszewicz's personal notes, and his two colleagues followed a similar fate. If the killers were after the Nazi archives, then many pieces of the mystery begin falling into place. And personally, I find this theory to be the most plausible one. If the Nazi archives were hidden or encrypted somehow, Piotr's free hand could have been used to point them out or decode them. The killers would then need Piotr alive for a time being, until they got what they wanted from him. They tortured him, putting out cigarette butts on his body and allegedly trying to pull out his tongue, but they would later treat his wounds to prevent him from bleeding out too early. Still, there's not that much support for this theory other than the facts that I have mentioned, and whatever you end up speculating, it is unlikely you will be correct, because we simply don't have enough evidence. In the end, this is all speculation. The case is still unsolved, largely due to the sloppy investigation that occurred after the murder. The police ignored blood smears near their door, they didn't check the front locks, and they failed to secure the fingerprints which just vanished during the case, apparently. Today, the murder of Piotr and Alicja Jaroszewicz is one of the biggest Polish unsolved mysteries, and it is unlikely that new information will come up by this point. All we can do is go over what we know and theorize. Though, if you have any exclusive information, want to correct me on something, or simply wish to leave feedback on this god-awful video, then leave a comment under it. That was all for today, and probably forever, so thank you for watching, and goodbye.